that bad, is it? How many got any sleep last night? Oh, about a dozen of you. Well, that's not good. How many of you are fans? Okay, let's put it this way. How many of you in this tournament are here to just root, or you're not actually playing? Everybody in this chapel who's not actually on the court playing a game, that means coaches and moms and dads and GBS guys, everybody that's not on the court playing a game, I want you to stand. Little exercise here. Come on, stand. If you're not on the court playing, I want you to stand. Okay? Lots of fans. Okay, thank you. If you're actually on the court, in the arena, putting it out, I want you to stand. Well, they're solid there together, aren't they? Okay, thank you. Those of you who are engaged in the world of sports, you clearly understand the difference between a fan and somebody who's in the arena getting the job done. I remember in high school I played both football and basketball. I wasn't really great at either one, but I loved to try hard, particularly in football. And I remember there were always Monday morning quarterbacks. There were always these big guys with great big pot bellies in the stands who could tell you how to do it. They couldn't run a 25-yard dash without, fainting, but they knew how to tell you to run the ball and get it over the goal line. Fans, lots of free advice, but never, ever willing to commit to playing the game. It's interesting, about a month ago, how many were in the Commons the night we had the cookie coffee night, and we had that big, long conversation about dating? Let's see your hands. Were you there? How many were there? Oh, come on, you're afraid to admit to it. We had a fabulous conversation on dating. I did some digging. I'm promoting dating around here. Relationships. We're going to have a Sadie Hawkins Day or something. I don't know. Well, wait till I'm done before you clap. I'm alarmed by the fact so many guys today are postponing this whole matter of courtship and commitment and marriage. When I was a student here, most kids were married around 20 or 21. Today, it's more like 28 to 32. A part of that is just this fear of commitment. And the reason I know that, I just simply start asking. Well, I said, come on, guys, what's going on here? Fear of rejection, fear of making a commitment and shouldering the responsibility of a family. Now, after that little conversation, I hear things are changing. Let's take a glimpse and see if they really are changing. Let's see.
All right. You all claim that you are willing to do anything to be with me, that you would give me your whole heart. And if that is true, then there are some things you must know and do in order to get with me. First, you must deny your father and mother. You must reject your brother and sister. You must leave the life you live now and give me your all. I don't want you to look back on the life that you live. I need you to focus only on me. Are any of you willing to do that? Second, you must count the cost. I am not cheap, and I am no knockoff. I am the real deal. You need to understand that there's a price to pay to be with me. You must be ready to even give your life for my name's sake. Are any of you willing to pay that high a price? And last, you must deny even yourself. All your possessions, who you are, who you think you are, and what you love most must come second. I need you wholly devoted to me. If you want me in your life so badly, I shouldn't have to fight to get in there. I come first. Are you actually ready to make that sacrifice?
What you just witnessed happens in the spiritual realm almost every day. In churches, in evangelistic campaigns, in lonely, dark, out-of-the-way places. Jesus comes and lays down his claims to our life. And similar debates go on. The cost gets counted, and slowly, one after the other, turn away. We live in sort of a consumer marketplace world. And because of that, the signs out there, everything is cheap, and we feel like we have to have it if it's cheap, whether we need it or not, because it's cheap. It costs nothing, and I want it. That's carried over into the Christian faith. And so often what you hear in the marketplace of the church is cheap grace. You can have your own life, you can do your own thing, you can go your own way, even keep your favorite sins, and still have Jesus Christ. You can stand on the pinnacle of the world and wave your arms around and say, all this and Jesus too. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus turned and looked at a large crowd that was following him, a lot of fans. Turned and said to them, if you want to be my disciple, you must hate everyone else by comparison. Your father, your mother, your wife, your children, your brothers and your sisters, and even your own life. By comparison, you only love me. He said, otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. He pushed it, and he said, then you're going to have to carry your own cross. Take it up, follow me. Or you cannot be my disciple. And then he backed up a little bit and said, well, don't begin until you count the cost. For who would construct a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might only complete the foundation, run out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, look at that person who started the building but couldn't afford to finish it. Or, if you were a king in a kingdom, and you went out to engage in conflict with another king, would you not first sit down and consider and take counsel whether you need 10,000 men or 20,000 men to win the battle? And if you don't have what it takes, wouldn't you send out a delegation and discuss terms of peace? Even so, you cannot be my disciple without giving up everything you own. In a low-cost, low-risk, you can have it all society, Jesus comes along and says, you want to be my disciple? There's no small print in my pamphlets. It's all big, it's large, and here it is. First, help me out, guys. Just advance it, Tim. First, hate your father and mother by comparison. Literally, it's all about me. Second, carry your cross and follow me. Third, give up all your possessions. What Jesus is doing is telling you right up front the worst of it. You know, it's interesting. The devil always puts in big letters in what he has to say right up front, big, bold letters. You shall not surely die if you do what you want to do. Or, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Big letters right up front. But in the small print on the back page, spoken real fast, are words like these. And after all the fleeting pleasures you will suffer, you will go to hell forever. That's the small print, spoken real fast. But that's reality. But Jesus puts his right up there. It's that simple, he says. It's that difficult. He doesn't just sound black and white. He is black and white about it. It's all or nothing. We either are in or we're out. Now, he's not talking about supreme self-effort. He's not talking about working your way into something. He's talking about being sold out completely to follow him. If you're really serious about being more than a fan, more than a bystander, more than someone just standing on the sidelines waving your little palm branch, he says you're going to have to count the cost, consider the commitment if you're going to follow me. Now, what does that mean? What does that really mean? Well, Jesus laid it out very clearly in that passage that I read to you. He said it means three things. He said, first, you're going to have to put every relationship in second place, and he becomes first place in every single relationship. Or you cannot be my disciple. Now I'm going to tread lightly here for a moment because I don't want you to misunderstand me. Normally, there's no conflict in loving Christ and loving our family. Fortunately, for most of us, those two just went together. But for some of the people I'm talking to this morning, there's some serious conflict between putting Christ first in your life and trying to please mom and dad. I had a parent tell me one time when I was recruiting his daughter, he said, I want him to get a real job. I want him to make money. One guy told his daughter, he said, if you won't go to Bible college and do this ministry thing, I'll buy you a car. Can you imagine? No, most people don't say it so blatantly, but there are 1,000 subtle ways that gets impregnated on the hard drive of our life. Money's what matters. Pleasing mom and dad's what matters. But Jesus said, my will's going to be first before everybody else's. Some of you would know theologian Francis Schaeffer. Some of you are too young, but you just may remember his books. What I didn't know about him was that he was raised in a non-Christian home. And his father was extremely opposed to him doing anything in Christian ministry. However, Francis became a Christian as a teenager and felt the call of God almost immediately on his heart to go into full-time Christian ministry. His father was very hostile to the thoughts, and he was conflicted. He said, I want to submit to my father's will, but I feel like I must obey Christ. And so it came time for college, and his father really put the squeeze on, and he said, what are you going to do? And Francis answered him like this in a very strange voice. He said, Pop, give me a few minutes to go down to the cellar and pray. In fear and uncertainty, he made his way down those old cellar steps and fell on his knees before God. And then in an act of desperate faith, something he wouldn't advise you to do, something I wouldn't advise you to do, but for him in that moment it seemed to be the right thing. He had a coin in his pocket. He pulled out that coin and he said to God, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't know what to do. He said, I'm going to flip this coin. And he said, God, if it's heads, I'm going to follow you. He flipped the coin and it was heads. He said, Lord, I want to be doubly sure. I'm going to flip it again. If it's tails, I'll go with you. He flipped it again. It was tails. He said, Lord, just to make sure I'm not making a mistake, I'm going to flip it again. If it's heads, then I'm going to follow you. He flipped it again. It was heads. He got up off his knees, went back upstairs, and he told his dad, I've got to follow God. His dad looked at him hard, walked through a door, and just before he slammed it shut, his dad's voice came back through that door, said, all right, I'll pay for the first half year of Bible college. Shortly after, Francis Schaeffer led his father to Christ. And you know the rest of the story. Just a few years ago, Kyle Edelman was in Africa preaching. And he was preaching under a shade tree, very common. Just preach under a shade tree to a small group of people. He said, but I noticed there were two young men in that group. They listened intently to everything I had to say. At the end, he gave what is typical in America, an invitation to receive Christ. He said those two men stepped out of that little crowd of about 25 or 30, came forward, and in brokenness repented and gave their hearts to the Lord. He said the next afternoon I was sitting in the house of the missionary, and I looked out through a window, and there stood these two guys. Each had a little bundle under one arm. It appeared their earthly possessions. He said, I called out to the missionary and I said, what in the world are these guys doing back? The missionary said, they're no longer welcomed in their tribe. Receiving Christ means they're an outcast. Kyle said, oh my, this is terrible. I wonder if they understood all of that before they made these decisions. I wonder if they'll stay, wonder if they'll hang in there. And the missionary looked at him and said this, they knew this would happen when they made the decision. It was already settled before they made their decision to go with Christ. Young people, have you made the kind of decision that says His love will be supreme above all other loves? Second thing, he said we must carry our own cross. A cross is not an implement of irritation or inconvenience. It's not some little thorn in the flesh, some little minor problem I've got. A cross is an implement of death. It basically says, come and die. Come and die. For you and I, that may not necessarily mean physical death. It could, but it may not. Probably won't. But what it will clearly mean is a very specific, clear death to yourself. Somewhere along the road of life, if you're going to really follow Jesus and be a serious Christian, you're going to experience a radical surrender to God on the inside that's just like a death. Till you're at the point no longer you, but He lives and reigns in your heart. I read a story about a preacher who, in the 4th grade, he said, I'd hit a huge growth spurt in the 3rd grade, and he said, by the time I hit the 4th grade, he said, I was tall as I was ever going to get. See, he said, I was a lot taller than any of my other 4th grade buddies. And he said, that came in real handy because out behind our school, there was this huge pile of dirt. And he said, we loved to play King of the Hill on that pile of dirt. And he said, I was the undisputed king of the hill. I was taller, bigger than all of my other friends. And he said, every day, man, I was on top of the hill when the bell rang after recess, and always the undisputed king of the hill. He said, until. We got a new kid in the 4th grade. And he said, they were bigger than me, taller than me, and worse than that, they were a girl. He said, I looked her over, and I said, well, she probably won't play King of the Hill. But I kept watching. And he said, in art class, I saw her eat glue. And I said, that's not good. He said, then we went outside, and I noticed she wore cowboy boots. And I said, that's not good. And then the thing that put the nail in the coffin was I saw her spit. And I said, uh-oh, we're in trouble. Sure enough, one day we went out to play King of the Hill, and here Barbara came. She dug her boots into the dirt, spit, and came after me. And he said she threw me off the top of the hill. And when the bell for recess rang to end it, she was the queen of the hill. He said it was a very bad day for me. Said I went to the principal's office and said, you know, I'm not feeling well, I'm very sick. And he called his mother, and she came, got him. He went home. It's a painful thing to stop being king of the hill of your own life. As a matter of fact, we never choose to make ourselves less. We claw and crawl and fight to stay on top. We never willingly relinquish our place as king. But Jesus said, you want to be my disciple? You're going to have to willingly relinquish your little spot as king of the hill. You're going to have to lay down the fight, stop the struggle, and make the surrender. Have you done it? Jesus said again, it's only when the grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies that it can bring forth fruit. Amazing story out of church history. I don't know if you can actually see the photo or not, but one of the most prominent stories in the history of the church is Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer, bishops, who decided they could no longer honor the word of the Pope. They could no longer believe in transubstantiation and some other Catholic doctrines. And so they were forced in a trial, and they were asked to recant, and they said they couldn't. And so the only solution for people who were heretics, they were to burn them at the stake. They placed them at the stake, and they put the wood around them, and the wood at the bottom was a little bit damp, and so it wouldn't burn very well, and the wood at the top was burning better. And they were basically just being scorched alive. They wouldn't burn. They'd actually even put rings of gunpowder around their neck. Some friends had actually made rings of gunpowder so that if the gunpowder caught on fire, it'd explode, kill them instantly, but it never caught on. Finally, someone out of mercy was able to set things on fire adequately. And as they began to burn, Latimer turned to Ridley and said this, Mr. Ridley, be of good comfort. Play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out. I don't know if you'll face death or not, but there are those around the world that are. And whether you face physical death or not, you're going to face a death to yourself if you are his disciple. The third thing, we must renounce all our possessions. A lot of you have heard me tell the story of Charles and Letty Cowman when they were called to the mission field and heard A.B. Simpson preach at a missionary convention and all the offerings that he took up, the 4 offerings. You've heard me tell that. The watch, the ring, all placed in the offering. And then all their money, and then themselves. I'm not going to repeat it. You've heard me tell it often. But what you don't know is that story was repeated to other congregations just like this one. And it was repeated one night in a congregation that a man by the name of Stanley Town was in that congregation. That's Charles and Letty on your left, I believe. That's right. That story was told about giving all to God. And a very successful businessman by the name of Stanley Town, who had founded and owned U.S. Plastics, came forward. And he said, I want to give my business to God. You can't imagine the alarm bells that went off. People began to tell him, you can't do something like that. You cannot give a successful business to God. What do you mean? What do you think you're doing? But he did. He gave U.S. Plastics to OMS International. They own it till this day. And out of the profits of that business, he funded the Every Creature Crusade. It began with some students here in 1917, 9 students from this chapel. That was the first group. In subsequent years, every year, the Every Creature Crusade has gone and saturated villages and towns and countries with the gospel. You see, Stanley Town knew what Jim Elliot knew. Jim Elliot knew that he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Have you counted the cost? He said, if you don't, you cannot be my disciple. You know, in our moment ago, the little illustration, I noticed some hesitation. I noticed some thought. I wonder how that's going to ultimately turn out.
I've thought about your questions. I'm willing to put my family and my life behind me to be with you. I've counted the cost, and I'm willing to pay it, no matter the price, even if it means my life. I'm willing to deny who I am to make myself holy for you. You will come first. I'm ready to be a follower.
That's exactly what it's going to take to follow Jesus. You say, who then can be saved? Well, if you notice, there was a word in this text that appears 3 times. You cannot, you cannot, you cannot. That word does not mean this is an exclusive club that you cannot join. No. That word comes from a Greek word, same Greek word in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. You usually read power, dunamis. That's the root of that word. Jesus is simply saying, you don't have the ability. You don't have what it takes to be my disciple. Unless in your heart you put me first. And then you can be my disciple. I want you to bow your heads.